What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Wandering Home podcast. Only heaven knows what number podcast recording this is, but tonight is hopefully, something a little special. It's definitely different. So today, well, here's the truth. Kevin was our co-host, and I were supposed to do a recording tonight, and Kevin got caught up, and I sort of owe him one, or owe everybody one. And that one is kind of like the story of my faith journey, if I guess that's what you call it. So I don't know how long this one's going to be. Totally unscripted, totally unrehearsed history. Let's just roll the tape on the intro and get straight into it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Womp, 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 womp. Talking about faith in all of its different forms and facets. And
there's a saying that every saint has a past, but that means that every sinner has a future.
blah, 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 blah. For Mr. Producer, I like to wave my hands up like that so that he knows that that's when he needs to bring me back. All right, let's get straight into it. There are a million things that I want to talk about that are not my faith journey. You know, Lil Wayne just dropped the Carter 6. We could talk for an hour just about that. Literally almost anything. I think for a really long time I've been avoiding kind of this conversation in general. But to give you a little bit of a background before we dive into it, I kind of grew up in the church. And when I say grew up in the church, I don't mean like I went to church every Sunday. Like my family ran the church that I went to. And I went to that church for school during the week and, twice on Sunday. And went to Christian schools until about middle school. So, plenty of pastors in the family, all that, right? So, and we were Southern Baptist. Not that when I was a kid or growing up, I really understood what that meant. Now it's like you say it and it's like, ooh. But I just knew that we kind of identified as Southern Baptist, right? And now I am not, I would say now 33, and I'm not really active in church. I'm a member of one. It is not Southern Baptist. It's Methodist. Ironically, I guess I married into a family where my wife is a preacher's kid, and both of her parents are career Methodist pastors, reverends. So, there's a lot there, right? Just like being surrounded by church and people who are teaching this stuff and, really trying to walk the walk. And I never really felt like that happened for me. My wife would say things like, oh, it just didn't click for her. Or like, she didn't find God or experience God in church as much as she experienced God in nature. And that she would go like and try to make it happen. And it almost like never did. And for me, like we'll get into the story of it all, but I don't think I ever really felt it. And it's hard to believe that you would be doing it wrong, So I basically boiled it down into like church is community. And so, you can have that or not, right? It doesn't impact what you believe or I think where you're headed. And when I say that, I mean heaven or hell. You could go to heaven or you could go to hell, and it's one or the other. But I don't think not going to church sends you to hell. All right, so let's dig into it. Man, this is a toughie. This one is a toughie. Okay, so I am born. That happens in 1991, in case any of you guys were interested. And I'm born in South Florida, North Miami. Actually, whatever, Miami. And so the earliest thing I can remember is going to this church, this daycare. It was named North Miami. Actually, what I went to is North Miami Baptist Church. And yeah, like I went to the daycare. My mom worked there. Her parents, I don't know when the church started, but like my mom's mom, so my grandma, was the church administrator and the school administrator and the choir director and the kids choir director. And my mom had me when she was 18, right? So like my mom went basically straight to work and just trying to make a living for us. And so like any kid, I wound up with my grandma a lot of the time. My grandma and grandpa would take care of me until my mom got off work and could pick me up or whatever. So I basically spent a night, day and night at this church, right? Like, think about this: Monday through Friday, we would leave the church at 3. We would get there at like 7:30. Then I would go to my grandma's house and whatever. On Wednesday night, we would leave the church for dinner and then come back for Wednesday night church. But before Wednesday night church was like kids choir. So it was like, 6 to 7 kids choir, 7 to 8 Wednesday night church, and then 8 to 9 was the real church choir practice. I mean, man, my grandma, now I say it out loud, like my grandma was slaving, dude. That was like all she did. Um Man, good for her. Wow. Um so yeah, I mean that's how I grew up. So that was my grandma on my mom's side. My mom and my dad met at the church, got married at that same church. I mean everything revolves around it. So when I was about 6, I think was when I realized like, oh, I need to be like a Christian. Like I need to be into this. Like it's important for me. I think when you grow up Southern Baptist, and this is kind of different from my family right now. Like in the Methodist Church, they like baptize a baby, with like just holy water or whatever. Or that we used to call it dedicating a child. So we didn't call it baptism, but you'd call them out. Bring the child up in front of the church, and there would be the family would come up, and the pastor, my grandpa, who was the pastor at this church, would say a prayer and he would ask like back and forth the congregation, like, will you help bring up this child in a godly way and, be an example for it, be a godly example for it, that kind of thing. And everybody would say, I do, I do, I do. And, you dedicate your baby to the church. And so yeah, I think by the time I was 6, there's in the Methodist or in the Southern Baptist Church, like baptism, actual baptism, in the water, dunk back, happens when you're ready. Like when you dedicate a baby, that's different from like being baptized, right? Um, a baptism is something that like a person chooses, and um, so when I was 6, I was like, it might be about time. So that's when I got baptized, and I remember how it happened. Like they were showing some movie that night. And I remember nothing about the movie, but I remember them saying this is going to be so impactful, yada yada. It's a really big one. So instead of regular church tonight, we're going to watch this. And I remember being bored of it. And I remember going out into the like basically like the lobby area where my grandma's office was, and like throwing balls up against the wall and stuff, and then basically deciding there that like tonight's the night. I'm gonna like walk up to the front at the end, and I'm gonna, you know, say the prayer and all that. So that happens um that night, and basically my family was like, that's a big decision, man. Like, are you serious? Like, we'll talk about it. And I always knew that, I've actually never really said it out loud, I think, but like that one was like kind of bogus. I actually don't know if at 6 years old you're really ready to make a decision to like get baptized. But I think that for me it was like the question was like, am I old enough? Is it the right thing for me to do right now? Would my family be proud of me? Like, and especially that night, like I felt like I responded to the call of like, this video is gonna, is really impactful, yada yada. And I'm like, oh yeah, so impactful that now I want to invite Jesus into my heart. So I don't think they took it at face value, but like I do remember having a conversation with my grandpa and like having a conversation with my dad, like back at home. We were all living together at the time. Like I do remember having a talk with them and saying like, "Yeah, man, I want to get baptized." What the fuck? And so we did. And later on, I think, by the time I was in like second grade, I left that school. It had only gone up to first grade. And this is how like my first grade teacher was my aunt. If you're following along with the story, okay, just so we can get all the characters right in place, right? So my great grandpa on my mom's side and my grandpa on my mom's side were both deacons at the church. My grandpa on my mom's side, Papa, he ran the soundboard at the church. My grandma on my mom's side was the church secretary, the choir director, the kids choir director, and the school administrator. And let's see, on my dad's side, um, my dad sang in the choir, my aunts sang in the choir, my uncle sang in the choir, um, my grandpa on my dad's side was the pastor, the elder pastor of the church. So that's the characters all lined up in a row. I was the first grandchild. I have a cousin who was born he was born 3 days after me. So we kind of came up together, like, just hand in hand. And, we were always together coming up, with my grandma and grandpa, because my mom and I guess his mom are somewhere around the same age, but, same stage of life, right? Like you're young, you have to go out and make money and things. So my cousin, Daniel was really, I think, my best friend until about 6 or 7 when we split schools. So I wind up splitting schools, and I go to a Christian school that my mom and all of her sisters graduated from, and it's like a mile up the road from the Christian school, from the Baptist school that I had just left. And the only reason why I'm bringing this up, so they made us go to chapel every week. I used to get in trouble in chapel constantly constantly. One time, me and this kid Luciani, we were like 7 years old. We were doing the Hornets with the rubber bands, like where you fold up the paper and you just whack people with it. We were doing that in the middle of church. I mean, we were just causing a scene. So yeah, we did that. So just to say, I wasn't really taking church very seriously at the time. Even as a 7-year old, newly baptized, right? Still going to church on the weekends. Obviously, that never stopped until about 14 or 15 when they eventually sold the church. Basically, the church building was sold and the church was deprecated, as they would say. So, in there, nothing really crazy. Um, Eventually, I wind up at a public school, kind of far away. Um, I'm steady as she goes, I think, at this point, like every other kid. Like, I'll go to church on the weekends because my parents are going to drag me there. What else am I going to do? Um, I was pretty far out, at this point. I think when I was like 6, 7, 8, I was like a little church superstar. Like, like you ever have you ever been at a church where they want you to do like a solo song? So like once every service or once every other service or something, like this church that my family ran would have like a solo where my papa would turn on the backing track because we didn't really have anybody to play music live, and somebody in my family, whether it be my aunt or my uncle or my mom, somebody in my family would get plopped up there on stage and have to sing a solo. So I got old enough for us to get plopped on stage and do things. So maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, I was like in the church plays, like, the lead in the church play, or it'd be like me and Daniel were, the two main characters, of course, because my Mimi, my grandma, could like practice us like workhorses. It's just like everybody else that you're gonna have at the church. Um, probably isn't gonna try that hard or have parents like. But this show was gonna be a hit, like in my Mimi's mind, and like she was gonna make it so by um, working us to the bone. I'm kidding. Rest in peace, Mimi. uh, yeah, no, it was great. So I remember doing that, and I remember having fun, and like we would do these little church plays, 2 or 3 times a year, and it'd be with the kids. It was great. Um, I also remember one time getting drawn up for like a duet with my mom in front of the church, and like totally freaking out. My mom had to take it solo, and that was pretty nerve wracking. But I do think, for what it's worth, like some of my experiences in the church, especially just like young growing up, helped, right? Like being put out there on stage in front of people. When I grew up, I never really had the fear of talking to people or stage fright or anything like that. And it was always like really easy for me to go up and talk to people because I think as a kid, like I had a lot of people talking to me. I mean, when you walk into the church and, you're the little one of the people in charge, and that's the church that your great grandparents went to, and all their old friends who want to pinch you on the cheek and tell you have beautiful red hair, and how great your freckles are and all this kind of stuff. Man, I was getting gassed out there in the church, man. I was like, my head was like boom. I think it's funny because like my wife grew up double pastor's kid, double preacher kid, and she's not really like me. Actually, I think she went in the other direction. All the people wanted, to do the same thing to her, and she kind of like didn't want that as a kid and sort of backed off. Like even now, I like going to church in the church that she grew up in. It's like they live on a mountain, and it's the mountain's church. It's like try and avoid people or try and not be seen, or like you don't show up 10 minutes early, you show up like 5 minutes late, and you sneak out 2 minutes early, like that kind of thing. So yeah, that kind of goes on, and then eventually they sell the church, and the identity is gone. My grandma, instead of ever getting another job, decides to retire at that point. My grandpa, instead of continuing preaching, goes to work for the state of Florida, and the band broke up. What can I say? No more Wednesday night, practices, and no more Sunday morning parades or anything like that. So my family was kind of in this position where we were getting split, because at this point we lived like 25 minutes away from the church at the time. And we were driving down. So when that stopped happening, like, I know 25 minutes doesn't sound like that much, but like I started to see my grandparents less, like at this point I'm like 12, you know? Um, so I'm not feeling very close, to God. We're kind of like 50-50 in and out trying to find a new church. I think it's always hard, right? Like, you want a new church? Yes. Do you want to jump right back into one right now? Or like, how do you find the right one? Or like, are you like so used to the types of services and the routine of how we've been doing it for years, that we don't want to accept another way of doing it. And I think we were caught in that limbo for a little bit. I think it's important here to like talk really quickly about my like prayer life in this time and like and all that, just so we can get a little bit closer. By the time I was like 12, my great grandpa had died, and I had wanted to be like really into the church for him in a weird way, and like for my family. And to me, religion was almost always like brought back to a point of like of honor, loyalty, like those types of values. So, for me, it's the idea that like you can't be a good old country boy unless you go to church on Sundays, and you need to wear your Sunday best. And, it was almost like if you loved your great grandpa, then you will be as involved in the church as he was to honor him. And that's just wrong. That's just not even close. Actually, I don't think anybody should be brought to church under a pretense. Like, it's almost like getting sober. Like, you can only do it for you. You can bring a kid up 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and like they'll do what they're told. And actually, they'll get pretty deep into character. They'll go on mission trips and they'll lay hands on people and all that kind of stuff. But like growing up, I could tell the difference between the kids in the church who were serious about it, especially as we got out of my church that I grew up in and into like the next set of churches that we wound up in. Like there were guys in the next church, we'll get there in a second, but that were just like, had the whole like on fire for Jesus thing going on. And, they really carried their Bibles around with them. And, I come to find out later, they were basically Amish, they were like homeschooled and lived in the boonies and, not really allowed to experience a lot of the things I was. And I think that's had an impact on my faith, was, and something I didn't really talk about earlier, but I didn't grow up in a like awesome white suburb when I was a kid. My mom was 18, my dad was even younger. Like I just never felt, I almost felt like, how do I say it? It almost would have been easier for me to be on fire for God had I not gone through or like lived kind of a difficult, I guess, in some respect, upbringing, right? I actually feel like the people that I know now as an adult that have just been for God for their entire lives, same church, always in it, yada yada, like um they were like middle to upper class white people, all of them, I said what I said, I guess. But I think like growing up, if you don't grow up that way, you have more like doubt, more like seeds of like, this happened to me, what the fuck, like that happened to me, what the fuck. um More like reasons to question, I think. But there's something in that, there's something in just like upper class white American church being so much different. And like even where I like in the church that I grew up in, that I was telling you guys about in North Miami, I actually, now being older, I think that was a church for recovery. Celebrate Recovery wasn't a thing, or anything like that. It was in a not great neighborhood, a predominantly Haitian neighborhood. I'm pretty sure that there was a subsidy for the kids who were attending the school. It may have been a government subsidy, government subsidized daycare. Definitely not high quality, and don't get mad, right? Like I grew up in it, but definitely not like high quality folks um, involved. Just to be frank, completely honest. Like when I went to the school after that, I was the one of two white kids in the grade that I was in. I got beat up for being white. Um, like I got into full on battle royales and had Saturday schools and all that kind of stuff, right? And then like when I got older, my parents moved into this, moved up about 25 minutes north to Broward County, and now I'm in like an A plus public school, and like we're going to predominantly white churches, and it's just a total shift. So anyway, to break out of that, at this point I'm like 13, 14. My family's in and out of some churches, trying to see what we like and what we don't. We're just not really landing on anything. So at this point, my grandpa's like retired, and they sold the building for the church and paid off the debt or whatever. And he's gonna they actually bought a house, so they were living in the parsonage of the church. And for years, I grew up like in and out of that parsonage. Like, like I remember being a kid and like being with my parents, and we're in an apartment, and then back with my grandma and grandpa in that parsonage, and then out and then in, and then at some point we were out and my aunt and uncle came in, and then they went out, and I think my other aunt and uncle came in, and then we came back. So it was just like the family house. I actually, for a long time, I think I want to say until I was like 10, I didn't even know that the church owned that house. Like I just thought it was the family house. And that's not super weird, because like multi-generational living is pretty normal um, down in Miami. But I just thought it is what it is. So anyway, they sold the parsonage when they sold the church. And my grandma and grandpa had to buy a house. So they bought a condo maybe 2 miles away from where my mom and dad and my family were living. So we decided we're going to go to church together again. And we found that one was like hyper local. This guy who was the pastor was like a Georgia Tech graduate, smart guy. Um, and it became like really about what's he teaching and do we like what he's teaching, and less about like the church experience. So this one had a youth group, but it wasn't like a mega church. Um, we met in a school, like in the elementary school library is where the youth met. But I do want to say there were probably like 25 or 30 people. There's probably like 25 or 30 kids that were active, which is a good group. And maybe like 200 or 300 people in the church. I can't even remember if they had 2 services. But this church was something else. It was country. It was like girls sit on that side, boys sit on that side. The bus was segregated. The room was segregated. Everything. Like we weren't really allowed to do anything together. And like what I tell people is like, my sister didn't even, by the time that I phased out, my sister, who's 4 years younger than me, didn't even bother to be involved with this youth group. All the girls wore the like Church of Christ style, like really long dresses, and wore their just very homely. You know what I mean? Just very homely. And all their eyebrows were too bushy, and they never clipped their nails, and you can imagine, right? Like these stupid braids around the back, and these girls never even heard heard a rap song. They don't even know who Taylor Swift is. Like the only thing that they listen to is gospel music in the car, and when they're not listening to gospel music and they want music, they just sing the hymns that they know, but they do it as a family, and they do it like a cappella style. And this isn't just one family. All the families, the reason that there were 30 active people in this youth group, 2 of the families had 7 kids, right? Like they damn near lived Amish. They were subsistence farmers. They sold, like they ran like their own nursery and sold, like it was like that. So, to be honest with you, I liked going because none of them were very good at basketball, and I could dominate on the court once a week, Sundays at 5. Um, or, if they wanted to play football, I would just crush these kids. Just nerded out pile of white nerds, just nerds. Nothing cool about them. Um, but I wanted to keep going. You know, there were a couple of good looking girls. By the time I was 15, I think I had my first church girlfriend. Um, her name was Becca. Shout out Becca. And she was cool. She gave me a reason to keep going back. But other than that, like, here's a couple of the memories I have. They did a 24-hour prayer day. So you had to sign up for multiple slots so that they could do like 24 straight hours of prayer. And they would do that relatively frequently. So like I remember, like, the idea is you have to go and do your part. I wasn't super into that, like being in for 45 or 60 minutes in a room all alone with a mat. They're telling me to, like, you have to pray like this, like lay down on your knees, head down, all this kind of stuff. That didn't feel super great for me. I wasn't really into that. And let's see, there's another time where um they called me into the big pastor, the one in charge, Mark, calls me into his office and he handed me a book, and I don't remember what it was, but it was about worshiping false idols. So at this time, I'm playing baseball, and I'm to the age where we realize, like, I'm pretty good. I'm competitive, like, I'm traveling around and all that. And sometimes I would leave church early or come to youth group late. And he told me that I was putting baseball in front of God, and that I'm worshiping false idols. And he handed me a book. Later on, then the youth pastor kind of came up to me and had told me that I needed to make a decision. So I basically got booted, from the youth group. And now that I'm older, I really think, like, youth groups, nobody has to be there. Like, I even tried being a youth pastor. Nobody has to be there. So I just don't know where you get off talking to a kid like that at any point. It's a kid, like maybe a 30-year-old, but even until you're 30, like, you're in the infancy of your faith. Like, we should just let the experiences be the experience. There's no, like, dictation or, like, where we predetermine this is how we're going to turn some kid into, I don't know, some, like, Christian superhero or something like that. And it felt like everybody that I was around was trying to be that. And I couldn't really pose that way. But still, like, for my family, again, like, it's all about, like, honor and loyalty and respect, and the idea that, like, my grandpa was a pastor and this pastor knows that my grandpa was a pastor. Like, I remember going out on a boat in the Everglades with, my grandpa and Mark, the pastor of this church, kind of like bonding and bringing me along. And of course, they want to have a talk with me about this or that, while we're out there. But so it was important to me to, like, be active, and I felt like I would really be letting people down. So I just found ways, instead of digging into, like, my faith, I would just find ways to figure out how to enjoy it. So, having a girlfriend was a cool way to enjoy youth group, and banging people around on basketball courts and football fields was a cool way to do it. And for what it's worth, now talking about it, like, the youth group also did some really cool stuff. Like, I remember having, like, an all night lock in. I remember doing a lock in at the church. I remember doing a lock in at a laser tag place. It was awesome. We went out of state on multiple mission trips, and we really, like, the top notch youth group from, like, an activity standpoint, but I think a little too intense. So anyway, after I got kicked out of there, I went to college, and um, or whatever. I didn't go back to church for like 2 years unless my parents made me. I had pretty much bailed, and when I would come back from college, my parents would, ask me to go to church with them, and I'd be like hungover at church, and don't make me go, get your ass up, we're going, that kind of thing. Like, how about don't go out drinking before church if you know we're going to make you go to church, kind of thing. And I went to school 8 hours from where I grew up. So I never went to church in Pensacola where I went to school. 2 times I did. Actually 3 maybe. The one time was at the Campus Baptist whatever center, and the 2 other ones were just separate churches. One time after getting into such a close call on a car accident that I there's probably no way I would have survived that. It was like 3 in the morning, and I decided to like race somebody down a 2-lane road, and I couldn't stop fast enough. So they were going to go down a yield lane like to the right. And instead of me getting caught behind them on that yield lane, I decided I was going to do a wide turn into the 4-lane road. And basically my car just spun and spun. And a curb stopped it. And I remember feeling it like go up on 2 wheels and come back down. And I looked up and I was right underneath this church sign for this church called Olive Baptist Church. And so like I remember that night I prayed or whatever. It was like like a God saved me sort of moment, I think. I went to church the next day. Yeah, and then I met my wife, and let's see, never went to church. Met my wife at college, and then whenever we moved back up to where she's from, her dad was still the pastor at the church on the mountain. So, I started going there. And again, I'm there every week. Why am I there every week? I'm there out of like respect and responsibility. And, I needed to be there because my father-in-law or soon to be father-in-law needed to have, the right idea about me and who I was. I need to be able to show that I was reliable and I would be there. Saying that I didn't want to be there, I wasn't into church, didn't seem too much like an option. And even now, as a 33-year-old, they take my kids to church every weekend, and we never say we don't want to go to church, but, we don't go. We do other things like go to the gym or go grocery shopping or like, have some productive time while the kids are out to church. But, it's been a really long time, I think, since I've prayed. I did when I moved here. That's where I met Kevin, was at like a faith-based recovery program. I did marketing for them. So I didn't really have to be like super into religion or the program. I would go to chapel from time to time. And I think as I've gotten older, I've realized that like I'm open to it. Like I'm still a Christian, I still believe in the cross, and, I still like a good sermon and and I like a good worship service, but the being there every week and the idea that like we act a certain way, we mask a certain way, and we're not ourselves. Like nobody can tell me that when you walk into a room, like when you walk out of the church, for the most part, there are things that you do and say differently. And I would charge it to anybody who's listening, like, prove me wrong. We all mask in some kind of way. And I feel like that mask, like, until we can peel that masking away and just get to the core of like who we are and the root of it, then the church community always feels fake to me. I think also as I get older and have kids, the church community can also really help somebody to feel safe. Like those people at the church, they really care about my family, and they really help my family, and they really like my kids. I truly believe that they would probably do anything, but I've felt that almost my whole life. I've just never felt like giving back to it. And I'm using this idea of like authenticity. I think as Christians we find it in pockets. And I've just kind of yet to find that right fit, like people where I really feel like I can be myself, coming to this podcast, like meeting Kevin, actually just being in around guys in recovery, like that's real to me. Like when there's no holds barred and I can tell you all the things that I feel or all the things that I've done without any judgment. You know, like if I walked into the Methodist church that my kids go to and I had a real conversation with them about me, it would be, I don't know what would happen next. um, you know, and I feel like that's where we can do a lot of growing in the church. And you know, we Kevin and I on earlier episodes we tested out. I went on a series testing out 3 churches, and you know, maybe there's some potential there. I definitely think you don't have to love a church to get something out of it. Now I prefer to say that I may be a little bit more like open to spirituality, or open to like having a conversation with people who believe in a higher power that's driving them, almost more than I like, you know, like using the term Jesus, because I feel like a higher power gives you direction and you can listen to it. And I feel like Jesus gives you this cross and this like beholden mentality that everything that you do every moment of every day has to be lived like for that. And I just don't believe that that can be true for me, you know. At the end of the day, I think religion and faith and all that is an experience, and that's how it goes down. That's why we tell these stories. um that's why we're here at the podcast, right? So like hopefully you can experience God in your way, in a way that's makes an impact for you, and then maybe you'll, who knows, maybe then you choose to be baptized, and it's not like me when I was 6, you know, and you're older and you've thought it through and you've said, you know what, like not only do I believe historically this was real, but I'm also willing to make a commitment to say, you know, um, to say it. So that's it. Kevin didn't know I was recording this. It's 45 minutes. We'll probably get taken down because I do a lot of spaces at the end. But everybody stay tuned. Coming up pretty soon, we have a series. We're going to talk through Kevin's book. Yes, he published a book. It's got 12 chapters, so to speak, 12 arguments inside of it. He's already posting it on the website, thewanderinghome.com, so check that out. We'll walk through, I guess, 12 episodes, one argument at a time. And so that's coming up soon. So thanks a lot for listening. Feel free to ping me, say what you will, ask me questions. You know, I'm doing this solo, so unprompted, really. More like a timeline. But you know, rock and roll. Now you know a little bit more about me and where I come from. Kevin is episode 1 or episode 2, so go back there and check out where he comes from. And I'll see you on the flip side later.